to know me, find out what I'm all about. It's kind of simple, not too typical, and if you're ready then I'll shout it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. I like trucks, big trucks. I like cars that go fast. I like boys that talk trash and take it as a...
It was slick, slippery and dark. We were hauling the maximum allowable load, 80,000 pounds gross. The snowplows had been by, clearing surface drifts and mashing the remaining mess down into a solid layer of scariness. The road east from Marathon, Ontario, was windy, bendy and hilly. I managed about 80 kilometres an hour on the straight bits, a lot less on the grades and bends. Not very fast at all on the downhill bits with bends at the bottom. Trucks can end up in lakes on slippery hills with bends at the bottom. But truthfully, I was being a bit pathetic. Other trucks with presumably more experienced and less wimpy drivers flew past us when and where they could. This wasn't frequent. I switched off the CB, not really wanting to hear what everybody thought of my speed, my mother or my physical attributes. After a couple of hours, we were stopped by yet another police cordon, another road closure. A day's worth of Highway 17 traffic was neatly corralled into the nearest truck stop. Wawa, Ontario is famous for, well, having a truck stop, really. As we drank tolerable coffee and ate tolerable chips, we heard the gossip. A truck had parked in the ditch in front of us. Behind us, the road that had held us up all night, being closed due to snowdrifts and whiteouts, was closed again. A 17-truck pile-up with fires and people killed. All of a sudden, I didn't mind being the sort of cowardly rookie who drives slowly on ice. Not dying, however wimpily, seemed to be sufficient achievement. In front of us, the offending truck was winched out of the ditch eventually, and we all trooped off in a grumpy conga line of tired and late freight. I waited for the back of the line. Who needs more abuse? The road remained slick. It snowed. The whiteouts came and went with every turn into the wind. In brief moments, when the visibility cleared, you could see waves on the lake flash frozen into little grey mountains. It took all day and most of the night to round the rest of Lake Superior and emerge from the dreaded weather system that is a lake-effect winter storm. We were exhausted, anxious, stressed out and late, but we emerged, which is more than some did. Overcautious? Moi? Probably. Now, why would a 50-something, nicely brought-up mother suddenly decide to go trucking? It was a good question, and like most good questions, it had answers both simple and complex. From "it sounds like fun," through "it's a traditional immigrant job," via "well, I can earn more money in a truck than I can with a master's degree," with a detour along "I've driven ambulances and stretch limos. If I want to get bigger, it's either a truck or a plane, and this course is cheaper." None of these reasons quite encapsulated all of it. And, of course, these were merely the rationalizations for a much vaguer pull towards the massive beasties that I'd been watching on the roads ever since emigrating from the UK to Canada. There was no rationalization, of course, for the other vague pull, a lifelong addiction to doing things merely because they are a little odd. Adding to my list of excuses that it seemed like a great angle for a book helped a bit when explaining to people with no imagination, but not much. Once the idea took hold, the research and subsequent mental percolating developed slowly. The seed had first been sown when 3 lads from England arrived at my B&B in Canada in search of a year's accommodation. We learned then that Canadian trucking companies liked British drivers. Apparently they tended to be well trained and good at what they did. During that year we at the B&B shared stories, heard about the people, the trucks, the great trips and the nightmare border crossings. We enjoyed it all. We laughed, cried and fumed along with Jim, Owen and Mick on their infrequent stops back home, and we developed an impression that this job might be kind of fun. The seed was buried fairly deep back then, a sort of generalised, well, if all else fails, I can always drive a truck. A few years later, the B&B was a distant memory and possible great idea for a book. The 50-something mother found herself empty-nested and wondering what to do with the years left before retirement. Why not get paid to see North America? I was a transplanted Brit too, therefore I had to be a terrific driver. I'd driven for a living before. I'd seen little of Canada and nothing of the States. How hard could it be? To begin with, I introduced it into conversations as a joke. The "if all else fails, I can always drive a truck, ho-ho" seed began to see the light of day. It was, of course, more of a test than a joke. People who knew me well would eye me strangely, give it a moment's thought, and respond, "I wouldn't put it past you, ho-ho." Frequently, these were the same people on whom I'd tested out the whole mad idea of moving to Canada and buying a B&B in the first place. As a joke, of course. All of a sudden, I was bumping into people from the freight transport industry. I probably had been before then, but you know how you start suddenly noticing things when they can serve a purpose. The specific questions began to leave my head via my mouth involuntarily. Which were the best schools? How long was the course? What would it cost? What could you earn? How much work was there out there? Did trucking companies employ women? Yes, I know it's the 21st century, but the London ambulance service took some persuading back in the 80s, and one doesn't forget a heroic trailblazing struggle in a hurry. It didn't help the growing inevitability that my early questioning unearthed the coincidence that the best trucking school in town was run by my old neighbours from the B&B. I got most of my answers from old friends, and those answers were worryingly positive. Hours, 2 months, not a lot, lots, and yes. I began another mad escapade once just because there was no answer to the question, why not? It seemed like it might be happening again. Oh dear. My neighbours' training school supplied me with a list of the companies they place rookies with, so that I could call for myself and ask about the female thing. Although being very much a 21st century training company, they seemed slightly bemused by the question. They told me how one qualifies for the course: clean driving abstract and police check, medical and mechanical aptitude test. Mechanical aptitude test? I wanted to drive it, not fix it. With the presence of mind to think this rather than say it, I thanked them prettily and toddled off to continue my research. I called a couple of the companies on their list of employers, leaving voice messages for recruiters asking about prospects for women on the road. One company called back within hours. I had a cosy chat with a lady called Gwen, who was amused by the question. Apparently my concerns really did date back to the Dark Ages. She also confirmed independently that I had chosen the best school. We discussed my background. "Call me when you have your license," she cooed. "We'll talk some more." Thus encouraged that work might not be hard to find, I went online to Google mechanical aptitude tests. Memories of ambulance days flooded back. The aptitude test back then had been to watch someone strip down and reassemble an Internox delivery kit, and then do the same within a time limit. I had visions of being asked to uncouple a rig, or whatever it is they call whatever it is they do, and could see my career on the open road rapidly disappearing into the black hole in my brain labelled pipe dreams. The internet was fairly reassuring, though. I found a site which allowed you to download a book full of sample papers, complete with answers and explanations, for the princely sum of $19. The book explained that many occupations now use mechanical aptitude tests to check that you are trainable in practical pursuits, and that test practice could make all the difference. The questions fell into several categories of IQ type thingy. I was well versed in most of them, spotting series and doing sums, finding the odd one out from loads of nonsensical diagrams. I have always liked that sort of thing, but I did appreciate the crash course in O-level physics. In no time I was relearning long-forgotten rules for levers, gears, and electrical circuitry. The practice tests seemed relatively challenging. They were aimed at people hoping to be taken on by armed forces to do very clever technical stuff. I sometimes didn't manage the recommended time limits. Occasionally I would be stumped by a question and infuriated by the answer. The odd one out of a bunch of mind-numbingly complicated diagrams just shouldn't have to be the one which is neither a rotation nor a reflection of the others. For goodness sake, how evil is that? I comforted myself with the thought that I was hoping to drive a truck, not design a helicopter, so presumably my impending test would have to be a bit easier than these. With the crash revision course in physics under my belt, and bits of paper confirming that I had a clean criminal record and nothing untoward on my driving licence, I made an appointment to be tested mechanically. The pre-test interview was fairly straightforward. Have I driven big stuff before? Is an ambulance big? I had thought so, but maybe not in comparison to things with many axles. Have I used a manual gearbox before? I'm English, that's what we drive. Am I beholden to alcohol or drugs? Does an occasional gin and tonic count? See previous question, I'm English, that's what we do. Have I worked away from home overnight before? Does shift work count? Will the family miss me? I'll ask the cat. The chap who asked all these questions had adopted an almost avuncular smile. When we began to muse about arrangements I might make for feeding the aforementioned cat, I had the scintilla of a suspicion I might be being humoured, but very nicely.
I like the sun when it goes down, and 6 bartenders in this cool town. And if sometimes all that sucks, I still like trucks, big trucks.